They thought they had broken her. Laughed, mocked, left her lying on the filthy floor as if her life meant nothing. But here's the twist. The world they thought they owned turned out to belong to her. These teenagers had no idea that their worst nightmare would walk into their classroom with a roster and a cold smile. And now, they were about to face a reckoning they could never have seen coming. The New York City subway at rush hour wasn't for the faint of heart. Clara Wilson, 38 and 6 months pregnant, knew this better than most. But tonight, as she lugged 2 heavy grocery bags onto the sweltering train, she couldn't have imagined just how wrong things were about to go. The car was packed, but one group stood out, a cluster of teenagers taking up an entire row of seats. There were 4 of them, loud and obnoxious, throwing chips at each other and laughing like they were in their own private comedy club. Clara's eyes darted to the empty seat between them. She tightened her grip on the metal pole, drew a breath, and made her way over. "Excuse me," she said, her voice steady but strained. "Would one of you mind letting me sit? I'm pregnant." The red-headed boy, probably 16 or 17, leaned back and smirked. "Pregnant? Oh, wow," he said, dragging out the words like they were some kind of inside joke. "What, the stork couldn't drop you off at home instead?" His friends cracked up, and a girl in an oversized hoodie added, "Yeah, lady, you sure the subway's your scene? Looks like you've got a lot on your plate, literally." Clara gritted her teeth but held her ground. "I'm not asking for much," she replied. "Just one seat." The biggest of the group, a stocky kid with a buzz cut, stood up theatrically. "Here you go, ma'am," he said with a mocking bow. "Be my guest." Clara started to sit, but just as her knees bent, he flopped back down, laughing so hard he nearly fell over. "Psych!" he shouted, while his friends howled with laughter. The girl leaned in. "Come on, aren't you used to standing? Thought that was your thing," she said, her tone razor-sharp. Clara stood frozen, her heart pounding as anger and exhaustion churned inside her. She scanned the car, hoping someone would intervene, but all she got were quick, guilty glances and a few phones raised to record the scene. Then it hit her, a wave of dizziness so strong she couldn't fight it. The world tilted, and Clara collapsed onto the grimy subway floor. The laughter stopped. "Holy crap, is she okay?" one of the teens whispered. The stocky boy's smug grin evaporated. "We need to get out of here, like now." As the train screeched to a stop, the group bolted out the doors, pushing past passengers in their panic. They didn't look back. The rest of the car erupted into action. A woman knelt beside Clara, trying to rouse her, while a man in a business suit called 911. Someone fanned her with a newspaper, and another brought water. When paramedics arrived, they loaded Clara onto a stretcher with practiced care. Her eyes fluttered open as they wheeled her toward the exit, catching a glimpse of herself in the train window. She looked drained, but her resolve was still there, burning quietly beneath the surface. As the subway doors slid shut behind her, Clara couldn't shake the memory of those teens' cruel laughter. They thought they'd left her behind, but life had a funny way of evening the score. Little did they know, this was far from over. Weeks had passed since the subway incident, but it stayed with Clara Wilson. She couldn't forget the teenagers' faces or the way their mocking laughter echoed in her mind. But life moved on, and Clara returned to her role as both a history professor and director at a local community college. For her, teaching was a way to spark change, and today, she was ready to tackle another class on social justice in American history. She stepped into the classroom, a fresh cup of coffee in hand, and scanned the room. That's when she saw them. 4 familiar faces sat in the back row, huddled together like they were plotting a great escape. The teenagers from the subway. At first, they didn't notice her, but when they did, it was like watching a slow-motion train wreck. Jason, the redhead, froze mid-whisper. Sarah, the girl in the hoodie, looked like she'd seen a ghost. Max, the stocky leader, slouched so far into his chair he practically disappeared. Clara's expression didn't waver. Years in education had made her a master of hiding her emotions. "Good morning, class," she said with calm authority. "Welcome to American History and Social Justice. I'm Professor Wilson, and I'll be your instructor this semester." The room fell silent. The teens exchanged panicked glances, their discomfort impossible to miss. Clara decided to let them stew for now and launched into her lecture. weaving through topics of empathy, equality, and the fight for civil rights. The group squirmed in their seats, occasionally sneaking glances at her as if waiting for her to call them out. When class ended, Clara closed her book with a deliberate thud. "Jason, Sarah, Danny, Max," she said, her tone clipped. "Stay behind. We need to talk." The rest of the students shuffled out, leaving the 4 teenagers frozen in place. Clara leaned casually against her desk, folding her arms. "Do I look familiar to you?" she asked, her tone sharp but measured. Jason hesitated, his voice barely a whisper. Yeah?" Clara didn't respond. Instead, she pulled out her phone, tapped a few buttons, and held up the screen. The subway video, now viral, played in full glory. Their laughter, the mocking comments, her collapse. It was all there. "That's you, isn't it?" she said, locking eyes with each of them. None of them answered. Max muttered something incoherent, but the weight of their silence said enough. "I could report this to the dean," Clara continued, her voice firm. "I could involve the police, but instead I'm giving you an opportunity. You'll participate in community service, attend cultural sensitivity training, and meet with me weekly to discuss what you're learning. If you fail to comply, I'll make sure you're expelled. Is that clear?" They nodded, their bravado crumbling under her gaze. "Oh, and one more thing," Clara added with a thin smile. "Your parents will be hearing about this. Expect a call by the end of the day." Their faces turned ashen. The weight of accountability had finally hit them, and Clara could see the realization settling in. As they shuffled out of the classroom, Clara felt a spark of satisfaction. She hadn't just confronted them, she had given them a choice: redemption or consequences. The lesson had begun, and it was one they wouldn't forget any time soon. It had been weeks since Clara Wilson had confronted the teenagers from the subway in her classroom. Jason, Sarah, Danny, and Max were now a familiar sight around the community college, but not in the way they'd hoped. Instead of blending in as regular students, they were now fixtures at community service projects and social justice workshops. Their schedules packed with activities designed to make them face the consequences of their actions. Clara had been true to her word. Their parents had been called, and each of them had been brought in for a meeting. Those conversations had been uncomfortable, to say the least. Jason's mother had stammered through an apology. Sarah's father had been furious, while Max's parents looked mortified. Clara didn't mince words. She showed them the subway video and laid out the terms: comply or face expulsion. Now, the teens spent their mornings cleaning local parks and their afternoons volunteering at a community shelter. Their evenings were devoted to workshops on cultural sensitivity and discussions about equity. At first, they dragged their feet, grumbling under their breath about how unfair it all was. But as the days turned into weeks, something shifted. One afternoon, during a workshop discussion, Sarah hesitated before raising her hand. "I guess I never really thought about how someone else might feel," she admitted. Her voice was quiet, but it carried weight. "I mean, I didn't think we were hurting anyone. But seeing that video, it's different, it's messed up." Jason nodded slowly. "Yeah, it's like, I don't know, I feel like a total idiot now." Clara watched their transformation with cautious optimism. The road to change wasn't linear, but these small moments gave her hope. The final test came when Clara organized a campus-wide seminar on social justice, and the teens were asked to present. Standing in front of their peers, they told their story. Not just the subway incident, but how it had forced them to confront their own ignorance. Max spoke first, his voice steady but low. "We thought we were just being funny," he said, glancing nervously at the audience. "But what we did wasn't just a joke, it was cruel. And honestly, we deserve to be called out." Sarah followed, her voice stronger. "I think we all learned something about what it means to really respect people. Not just because you're supposed to, but because it's the right thing to do." The seminar was a turning point. Students applauded their honesty, and even the faculty commended their willingness to own up to their mistakes. Clara felt a swell of pride, not just for their growth, but for the impact their story had on the campus. The story of Clara's subway ordeal and the teens' redemption spread beyond the college. Local news picked it up, hailing the college as a model for restorative justice. The viral video that had once been a source of humiliation for Clara now became a symbol of accountability and growth. Clara didn't forgive easily, but she believed in second chances. By confronting the teens with the consequences of their actions and giving them the tools to change, she'd turned a moment of cruelty into a lesson in humanity. As she watched Jason, Sarah, Danny, and Max leave the stage that day, their heads held a little higher, she couldn't help but smile. They weren't perfect, not yet, but they were learning, and that was a start.